All right, we've reached the semifinals of SE Ultimecia, and this was Sergio versus Seto. I want to say, this is coming out well after the fact, and when I record after the game, I try not to, you know, pretend I don't know the result. So, stupid phone. Um, so Seto did go on to win this match and advance to the finals. But I wanted to shout out Sergio's tournament. I think he played really, really well in round one. Um, Quite well in round two. He got in serious trouble one game, but actually played a pretty remarkable tie really quickly. Um, if you go back and check out this game, I think I was, doing a eulogy for him. And then, like, a minute and a half of looking at the position, he finds the only tie, and it's a really neat only tie. It was a move in four in a position where he basically just completely sacks the top row, but has calculated it out really well. Really neat move, really nice find. I've been thinking about doing puzzles based on tournament games, and that will immediately become one of my favorite puzzle positions because I just thought it was an awesome save. So yeah, I think Sergio had a really good run and really deserved this semifinals. But Seto will eventually prevail here, and we'll take a look at the games. So Seto starts 8-9-1-8 in 7, which makes a good deal of sense given Seto's hand, right? 7-6-7-5 is kind of a utility card, but his hand is better at taking back this corner than it would any other, right? 1-7-8-9 not only can recapture the corner, but it has an easy time recapturing the recapturer. And a similar thing for 7-6-7-5 and 4. If Seto has to capture, he's never going to be forced into a situation where it's clumsy or difficult for him to capture the next card in that capture chain. And that's something I like to build with starters, right? Sometimes you see hands which start like 8-9-1-8, and their recapturer is something like, I don't know, like 9-9-3-4, something like that. And like that 9-9-3-4 can recapture with high numbers facing out, but those high numbers can be really difficult for you to deal with. And it can be nice to have a hand that just puts out something tough to take. And if it is taken, you can take it back in ways that are easy for yourself to keep recapturing. Sergio goes in 9 here, which I think was a very reasonable move. Sergio's hand is not built such that 9-3-4-9 is immediately safe. He has 2 recaptures from 6, but none from 8. But now he creates a recapture from 8. I think the worry here is that Seto's 1-8-9-8 could be an absolute bomb here. It could be a very good card. And the reason I wanted to start with this game, though it is the first game, so I was going to show it anyway, is Seto made, I think, a really interesting move here. So I want to kind of quickly break down how I would probably think about this position, and thus why I find his move a bit alien and thus worthy of more consideration. Seto and I play very, very differently, and so because he plays so differently than me while playing at such an extraordinary high level, I think he's one of the players I could learn most from by understanding why he makes the moves he does, because he sees possibilities in quite a different way than I do. So, kind of on a basic level, I might think, okay, 1-8-9-8 is really good in 6 and 8. So I want to leave those two squares open. I had first turn, so I'm going to have last turn, and that card can land really well in those squares. My one worry is that 1-8-9-8, if it lands in 6 as my final move, it's probably going to take anything in 5, but it's almost never going to take anything in 3, unless my opponent is very generous in what lands there. So it might not be a good enough sweeper to actually win, but I would probably try to keep those squares open. I'm going to get last turn. I know whenever they go in one of those squares, I can go really effectively in the other. And that it's kind of tricky for them to go next to the 9-3-4-9 because it's a big corner. So their only ways to play next to it that don't walk into combos are either 8-8-9-1 and 6 or 8-9-1-8 and 8. And it's going to be tricky for my opponent to play if they have to hold on to both of those cards. So my instinct would be leave those squares open. And that might mean a move like. It's also scary to leave your hand with a lot of ones facing up if you're going to go on the top row. Like I was thinking you play away from the action in 1, 2, or 3, but that can be quite tricky to do because if you play in 1 with, say, 9-7-2-8, that's a kind of weak corner, but it's actually not a weak corner to your hand because that 2 is quite hard to recapture. So maybe something like 7-6-7-5 and 2 or 9-7-2-8 and 1 would be the kinds of move I'd start considering because I would think my 1-8-9-8 with those paired squares of 6 and 8 is going to be powerful enough to compensate for other things, and I want to leave those squares open while creating as much as I can elsewhere. Um, Another thing to think about is Sergio's only capture in 4 is 8-8-9-1. So if I played a move like 9-7-2-8 in 8, maybe not that exactly, we'll reconsider that in a sec. If they were to play 8-8-9-1 in 4, I can combo that back in 1 with 7-6-7-5, or I can combo that back in 5 with the same with 1-8-9-8 or a plus with 1-7-8-9. So it's very hard for them to go in 4. Now they might have a nice setup in 6 there, and it's possible 4 just works for them for tactical reasons. But a move like 9-7-2-8 and 8 would strike me as very appealing. It's a different mode of thinking, right? One of my modes of thinking would be leave 6 and 8 open so that 1-8-9-8 is strong. The other mode of thinking would be what are their attacks on my starter? Well, they have a pretty good way of playing against it in 8, in that I can't, I can take 7 back, but if I went in, say, 4 and they go in 8, I'm not getting 8 back. Not getting 7 back. But if I go in 8, they can't go in 4 without walking into combos, and that seems like it should be pretty favorable to me. So another thing I would strongly consider, and I think the move I would end up making, is probably 9-7-2-8 and 8. But I kind of have these two biases. One is here's my combo squares. I have one card for both squares. Play far, far away to leave those squares open, playing like 1 or 2. And the other would be just block the in between square. They don't have a good attack in 4. And if they go 6, I can block 5, and they still won't have a good attack in 4 unless I really set them up, because I still have 8-8-9-1 and 4 covered. So those would be my two instincts. And Seto does something that is completely alien to both of these conceptions. Seto plays in 6. Now, this does not leave 6 and 8 open, right? He's not saying, oh, those are paired squares that are good for me. I better leave them for the endgame. This is not saying you can't go in 4, or sorry, you don't have anything good for 4, because it's not forcing play in 4 at all. What it is saying is, I have play in 8, right? And that means if you try to deal with my card in 6, I can combo back in 8. And you don't have play in 4 against my play in 8. So it's creating this sort of chain, right? We can agree Seto has good play in 4, right? And so by going in 6, he threatens 8. And if 8 is played, he has access to 4, and Sergio doesn't really. That's sort of how I might get here, but I just don't think I'd ever play this move. And what I think my quick scan with the solver said is this is a very good move, and this is not a move I would find. So I'm curious if you're watching this, whether or not you are Seto, and you have a kind of explanation that's more generalizable. A lot of explanations are very specific. Like I saw this variation and I saw that variation, and those are really useful and good. But I'm trying to speak in words, not variations. So I would be curious to hear a kind of verbal explanation for why in this kind of setup you would go in 6. And I think we have to understand it as it is important that 6 is weak to 9, because that means 6 is not weak as long as we have play in 8. And so all we need to do, it's a little like, in fact, Seto and Akiyama I think play similar in some ways. It's a little of I see where the opponent wants to go, or I can force them to go, and as long as I have play against that, I am in good shape. So Sergio, I think, does the very reasonable thing and blocks 8. And here I'm going to quickly play out the game, but then we're going to come back and look at a second thing here. Seto continues to make moves that I would like not remotely consider unless I was staring at the position at length. But a 30-second check of mine is never going to remotely consider that square. Worth noting here, Seto can block 5, but Sergio now has locked in a card in 9. He has flipped 7, so if you block 5, he can block 4 without walking into combo chains because he doesn't have to flip 7. If you go in 4, Sergio can block 5. There's a lot to think Sergio's position's fairly pleasant, and when I was doing my quick scan of the game, I assumed Seto was in actually quite a bit of danger after 1, 7, 8, 9, and 1. In fact, I assumed, because I assumed second turn must be way ahead here, that Seto had been playing second turn. But no, Sergio is, and Sergio is playing very well. This position turns out to be a little more dangerous than I would have guessed, but both players play quite accurately to lead it to a draw. Sergio blocks 4, Seto takes the plus that has been set up in 5. Sergio combos going up 8 to 2, but Seto's 1898 is a sufficient sweeper to hold the tie. Note also, like 8, 9, 1, 8, and 2 would have been another way to tie. There were a number of ties. Nice finish, nice game. Afterwards, Seto thought that 1, 7, 8, 9, and 3 would have been winning. And this is one of those positions that, like, instinctively, without doing any analysis, I assume first turn is playing for the, or second turn's playing for the win here. Right? Second turn has the secured card in 9. Second turn is ahead 6-4. And it doesn't seem obvious to me that first turn sweepers are so good that that shouldn't matter. Right? Sergio has options like 8, 9, 1, 8, and 2. They can block either 4 or 5. They can take a plus in 5 with 8, 8, 9, 1. It seems like there should be a lot of appealing moves here. And it is kind of interesting that actually they basically just all lose. And that Seto said afterwards he thought this was winning. It turns out there is one tie here, but not easy to find. And I think one of those situations where my general heuristics, my kind of like guidelines for evaluating a position at distance, just don't properly understand that this position is in fact very, very dangerous. So let's start with a kind of obvious try. Let's say we block 5. Let's say we take the plus in 5. And we go up 8 to 2. I think the problem is we're getting swept. Will you let me move? There we go. I think the problem is we're getting swept here. It's 5-5. If you play 7, 1, 7, 8, and 4, I take you with a plus and I win 6-4. If you play 8, 9, 1, 8, I combo through and I win. And if you go in 1, I'm taking multiple cards and I win. So this should be a win. All right? But there are other ways to block 5. Say you block 5 this way. Well, this one walks into combos, so this one seems more directly bad, right? This one, I make it 5-5, and again, my 7-6, 7-5 is just absolutely sweeping everything. Okay, so you can't block 5. But interestingly, like, yes, 5 loses to getting comboed through, but it loses because there's a sweeper at the end. You have to be very specific. You can't just see that it combos through. You have to see that you have a sweeper after. Okay, what about 2? 2 also looks potentially appealing. Sergio would be up 7 to 3. Now there is a same, and that same basically leads to the exact same thing we were just looking at. Yeah, the synergy of the 7, 6, 7, 5 playing off these 8s means it perfectly covers both 8s and 7s, and just completely dominates that left wing. So I do remember there is a tie here, and I do remember it is in 4, but we should figure out together, what's the tie in 4? Now, one thing I notice, yeah, okay, I think it's Golbez. If you're same tier, we have this same back, and then we actually win. So we have 5 pretty well covered. You can also go in 5 like this. but then I captured just enough to hold the tie. You can also combo, of course, but if you combo, I have sames in response, and that's going to flip enough that I tie. If you go here, then I think again, as long as I'm saming, I'm not going to lose, right? In this case, I win, but I'm not going to lose. And then there are setups in 2 as well, right? Something like this. And here, I don't want to be saming because then it combos through. But can I just go here? Yeah. So 2 doesn't work with that card, and we have one last card to check. But here I can go in 5 again. All right. I mean, tricky to see. 4 is a hard move to find, and this position is so much scarier than it looked to me, because like, what have we fundamentally done? We've taken a position where we have no safe cards. They have a locked-in card in 9, and it is just, and they are up 1 and get the next capture, right? So like all my kind of general senses of these long L setups says first turn should be looking for a win here, not first turn should be looking for their only tying move. So really neat idea, and shows how much more venom 6 had than I thought it did. And so a really nice job by Sergio to hold here, and a nice job by Seto to hold here too, because I like Sergio's moves as well. Again, I think Sergio played a great tournament, very deserving of his icon. I think it's his first icon. I might be wrong on that. His first single player tournament icon. And I know, he obviously doesn't consider himself a particularly high end player, being like, I can beat Jack and Club. Clearly, they're too easy. But Sergio had a great tournament, and yeah, this is another good game that he added to his resume, and against the very top of opponents. But also just really interesting conception in 6 and 3. Again, I'd love if someone else would verbalize this. I think, you know, the better a player is, the more they're going to have to end up just calculating variations, right? The more it becomes a variation game rather than a general understanding game. But to start knowing which variations to calculate and where to start calculating, it really helps to have those verbal things first. And then that starts cluing you into certain moves, that certain positions might be better, and you know where to spend your time calculating. So when I'm trying to learn something, I try to put it in verbalization, and then I can start, looking at it in ways to calculate it. But it really helps for me, at least, to start verbally. So if someone has a better verbal explanation than I've given for this move in 6, I would really enjoy hearing it, because I think it's a very interesting move. That said, let us move on to the second game of the match, where Sergio starts in 5. Sergio had tremendous success this tournament with 5 starters. He played a 6-3-6-3 surrounded by 5-6-5-1s in round 1 and won. And in round 2, he also won his only first turn game. He's 2 for 2 on first turn coming into this game, and both with 5 starters. Here, however, unlike the previous rounds, the 5 starter is clearly a kind of neutral card that the others can play off. But looking at the hand quickly, it's easy to see the other cards don't play off it that comfortably. That this is going to be a little bit difficult to work with. Now, Seto goes in a corner, and normally I think of corner plays as synergistic ones against center starters, and we can see that it does set up a plus an 8. Perhaps a useful thing from last game, that given that the hands were kept, we're seeing the same hands as in game 1, is perhaps a really useful lesson from last game is that 7-6-7-5 is incredible on the left-hand side. Just really dominant. Maybe less dominant with 7-6-7-6 and 5, but also maybe just as dominant. And so leaving that part of the game open feels very logical given what we saw in the last game. On the other hand, Sergio has multiple captures from 6, but more trouble taking it from 8. And we can see a sort of similar thing to one concept last game, is if Sergio ever has to go in 8, right? The only appealing card there is 8918. And Seto takes back with 8918 and 7. Sergio can't go 4 without getting comboed. And so Sergio has no play against that, and Seto will lock in 7 and 8. So rather than look at this as a big setup move, I think instead we should look at it as a Seto might be threatening to just go in 6. Perhaps even with a very low number facing out. Maybe maybe just 1789. Maybe 1789 and 6 is the threat. Because what can Sergio do if 1789 lands in 6? If he takes it with 9349, he's comboed. If he takes it with 7178, he's comboed. He can't take it with 8918, so his only capture is 8891. And that is taken, and it is taken in such a way that you can take back, but we're starting to get left with only cards with no right and very little down power in 9349 and 7178 as the right hand of the board is filling up, and those are really likely to be very poor cards. So I think this move should be treated as sort of specifically playing against a direction of Sergio's and saying there isn't use for your 9349 or your 7178, and I'm going to play and force action such that those cards continue being bad. Now, odds are Seto was thinking completely differently than the version of this I've put on him, but I do think Seto here has a threat to go in 6. I think there is a pretty substantial, even with a 1 facing out, threat to go in 6. So Sergio just blocks 6 immediately. Sergio specifically has done well with the center attack, and in fact, we've seen a bunch through this tournament either the center attack being really promising, both Sergio and Yevon pulling it off really nicely. Well, Sergio more doing kind of lines. Yevon was the one who played a nice center attack. Also, in the game Midas beat Delial, that Delial's saves might have been if he had kind of gone for a center attack, which is you play in the center and wherever they go, you play next to it. Often with something difficult for them to take. Now here, Seto can't capture from 3 without being comboed, right? 1898 and 3 is hit by 9349. But Seto does have a very useful thing to do in 8, and he does it. There are a few different things you could play in 8. He goes for the capture. 1789 is also obviously quite appealing. One downside of 1789 is it is weak to 5, and so if you ever flip 5 and Sergio starts setting up some combo potential, that can be really dangerous. I think another key point of this is Sergio has given up his capture of 8918. So, 1789 and 8918 landing in 8 are both safe. You may as well use the one that is not vulnerable to any captures. On the other hand, it does give up potential play against 3, right? We do control 8s or less to the left from 3, and where else is Sergio going to play here, unless there's something really good in 1. But the problem is 9349 and 7178, it's really hard for them both to play well. And I think that's going to be Sergio's doom here. Sergio takes the safety in 3, but Seto has calculated this out. Sergio basically has a 1 good card for the endgame, and that is just not enough. Seto blocks 2. He continues playing against Sergio's right weakness, right? There have been so many lines we've looked at where 9349 and 7178 looked like they would be held too long and just not be sufficient. And the 7178 is just kind of a dead card, and you're already down 6-4. So if you play 7178 in either, say, 1 or 7, then 7675 can just take it, and your 8891 will take that back, but it won't take the second card you need for a tie. Sergio goes in 1, Seto blocks 4, and Seto gets the win, and Seto advances to the finals. This is the 4th time he has made a 3-way finals, which is not just a record, but it is also, he is the only player, but also just that there is an only player is remarkable. He has been in every single 3-way finals that has happened in the site's history, as best I can tell. You could argue there is an exception in TTAC 1, which had a final 3, but it narrowed to a final 2, and so technically not a 3-way finals. I think that's TTAC 1. Might be TTAC 2, One of those, if you check the bracket, narrowed to 3 people, but from 3 people it went to two for an actual finals. Um, and so there have been 4 3-way finals, and this is one of them. And one of the messages I received, if you heard my phone beep at some point during this, was this was, I guess, known since predictions, but ties count in the finals. And that is very interesting. I have never been good at that format personally. Um, Knowing ties count makes me kind of panic and try to force results in positions I shouldn't and take risks I shouldn't take. And so I've always been like a bad Rhinoa player, or not bad, but like worse than my caliber of general play should suggest, because I make poor decisions in that format. It is also interesting, though, in that it makes it a lot easier for a surprise result to happen. I think that's an important trait, right? If if a match goes until someone wins, there is a pretty good chance, if a player is clearly favored, and Seto is going to be the favorite in the finals. I think this hurts his odds to win the tournament, right? It is easy for him, if he is, say in both his matchups, whoever they are, say he's 25% to win and 75% to tie, and has no chance to lose. He's good enough, he will never lose. Obviously, everyone can lose some of the time, but we're making up numbers here. 75% he ties, 25% he wins. Now, again, against both opponents. Now, if it's one game only and a tie counts, then he's over 50% to tie both his games. And so if there happens to be a decisive game in the other match and he happens to tie both his games, which will happen, a little over half the time, he has just come second, right? And so I think this, if it was until someone wins, because he's never going to lose, he's always going to win his matchups, he is guaranteed eventual victory. So this is a format that is helpful for underdogs and bad for favorites, which doesn't mean it's unfair or anything like that. I'm just saying what the implications are is based on ratings. In a normal format finals, and you can take my ratings for whatever they're worth. Given who's left in the field, I'm not going to say what happened in the next matchup, but the next matchup has already happened as I'm recording this. It estimated Seto at about 2/3 chance to take the title. That's I would think a little high, but Seto is playing incredibly well and is an incredibly strong player, and it does not seem to me an absurd number for it to have thrown out. And that is not disrespecting his opponents, because there are a whole lot of possible matchups where his odds would be even better than that. So, how does that change in a ties count format? It has to go down a whole bunch. So suddenly, instead of Seto being, clear and substantial favorite over the field, and even if my numbers aren't very good, it's hard for them to be so far off that it wouldn't at least be right he's favorite over the other two. Which doesn't mean he can't lose. Obviously, favorites lose all the time. But I do wonder what the odds are with ties counting. And I don't have any, records of tie rates to calculate this that would be useful. But my guess is this makes it much, much more even, right? That anyone could sneak it under these circumstances without things being all that weird. It's just very easy to tie 2 games in a row. Very easy. In fact, if we bring up, it won't really show up on your screen, but if we bring up this last, say round 2, right? In round 2, every single matchup had at least one tie, right? Tezuka Blizzard, 1 tie. Turd Seto, 2 ties. Vid Yevon, 3 ties. DJ Cliffy, 1 tie. Deli Almeidas, 3 ties. Crescent Sergio, 2 ties. If we advance to this round, we have Seto Sergio, 1 tie. Oh, I wasn't going to spoil that this video. My bad. Tezuka did beat Yevon. Tezuka Yevon, 2 ties. That'll be my next video. We'll be going over those games. Close that. So basically every match we've seen from now multiple rounds of this tournament, and we'll see how Midas DJ goes. That hasn't happened yet as I record this. I'm rooting for my guy DJ. I think he has a real shot here. But however that match goes, um, unless there's no, we're basically looking at 2 rounds of tie being clearly the more likely result than a decisive game. And the finals, you could argue, are going to be more balanced than previous rounds. Obviously, players tend to get stronger and stronger as the tournament goes on. So the odds of a tie in any given game are pretty high. And that really could swing it to a surprising result, right? Or like what feels like, because Seto not winning is an upset, right? No disrespect to anyone, just Seto not winning is an upset. And that doesn't even mean if Seto like loses, he's like done badly. Obviously, Seto made a run to the finals. He has done great, whatever happens. Uh, but I think this makes it much more even, which is in general like not particularly to my taste, right? Obviously, I want whatever favors the people I'm rooting for, and I am rooting for the Avalanche players, Tezuka and DJ. For me, this is good. But from my kind of general tournament perspective, I prefer needing a player to win or a player to lose to be eliminated, right? And here it is very possible that someone ties twice and comes second. And in fact, I think that's probably going to happen, right? I think the most likely outcome is kind of, 3 games will be played and you'll have 2 ties and a win, right? And whoever gets that win is the champion. Now, easily could not be that, but I think the single most likely result is that one. And that makes it really easy to be the best player and come second. If you're the best player, you're still favorite to come first, but it's a lot easier to come second. So I've been thinking just about how the numbers here would work of like what would the bookie odds be? Because the bookie odds just got way closer. And so obviously Tezuka is in great form. He just had a great run to the semifinals in TTAC. He won the TTAC before that. He's played fantastically so far. He's in great shape. This was already, this is a very strong competitor here. And Midas just beat Delial. He looks great. DJ basically doesn't lose games he shouldn't lose. Like, he doesn't lose at all to players weaker than him, and players stronger than him, he regularly puts up really good fights. He could have beaten Midas and Nephilim. He had a winning position at one point. He played really well he gave Deli his toughest matchup in TTAC, I think by a pretty clear margin. Like, he's just on this fringe of breaking through to those top levels. And in a format where ties count, like, if DJ gets past Midas, don't be surprised if DJ comes second. DJ's hard to beat. DJ has a really good chance to get 2 ties here. And like, if someone happens to overpress, like you could imagine something like Seto ties twice, and then Tezuka thinks I have to take my chance and beat DJ and takes risks. Suddenly DJ is your champion. And that would be really cool, right? I say this as an Avalanche guy, right? So slightly biased. And it's not that DJ couldn't win without that either. I just think this really makes it up in the air, and that suddenly everyone's chances, other than Seto's, are significantly better, and Seto's are much worse. And he is still favorite, but it's exciting. It's exciting from a if you want chaos, this is how rounds like this should be done. This makes it just much easier for the surprising result. And I am very much repeating myself at this point and trying not to say anything insulting to anyone. But I'm enjoying this tournament a lot. I've had a lot more. I think this has been, of the tournaments I haven't competed in, I loved that Delhi won TTAC, but I've gotten more invested in this one. I think because I really enjoyed all the games in round 2. Actually, speaking of Sergio, Deli's win over Sergio might be my favorite game of TTAC. Deli's move in 5 was really cool there. So anyhow, let's conclude. Let's end this video. Congrats to Sergio. He had a great tournament, very deserving of the icon. It was really exciting to see him go this deep and go this deep playing with center starters and just a different style than everyone else was doing. Seto heads to the finals where he is favorite, right? We didn't get Del Toyama Bull, which I think most predictions had, but we're going to get something really exciting. And Seto is the favorite, but not nearly as big a favorite as I expected him to be, given this is going to be a tricky finals to navigate. You really need to like immediately win, right? And you cannot lose. Now, what happens if everyone ties or everyone wins one and loses one? I assume the bracket resets and the finals happens again. But you really need to come out strong in a single game. And I have no idea who's best at doing that. I know it's not me. I know it's not me. Yeah. All right, we'll end there.